thinking, getting ready for today and the announcement with, or at least the meeting with Matthew and Tiffany and their family. I was thinking this week about how amazing it has been over the last 9 years watching as Chuck joined our staff and split his attention between little kids and bigger kids in our student ministry, and then us hiring in Amy Millette helped us move into this facility, kind of imagine what youth ministry, children's ministry would look like with space that we could just turn a light on and be a part of, and that was amazing. And she left her staff a couple years ago, went work full time. Her husband played guitar in the band this morning, and I just think it's amazing knowing that Heather just left our staff to go on full time as a teacher, and she's done an amazing job helping build that. But what I love more than anything is that all of our families still a part of our family, and they've built and helped us move forward, done amazing things. And this is the opportunity we have. For the first time, we'll have full-time attention placed on kids ministry and full-time attention placed on student ministry, which before Plan and Journey, spending almost 2 decades, Sheila and I working in student ministry means the world to us. And so we are so excited about what God's doing next, and that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. So here's the deal. We've been in this series, we've been talking about having an epic life, not being this massive, over-the-top life, this crazy life that people can't always relate to. But we said we were going to start playing with this word epic. And last week we talked about how every part is crucial. Every part of your story matters. And we talked, and one of the most important things that we said last week, in fact, the bottom line, was that we invited people really to understand that an epic life is one that trades in your little story for a lead role, a lead role in your story for a small part in his story. So if we will trade in our small part, our small story for history, we can make his story. And that really is the biggest piece of it. But I was thinking about it this weekend. I've been on this classic rock kick. Any classic rock fans? Okay, I've been on some classic rock kick lately. I've just been running through it, and I ran across this amazing quote by the great 20th century theologians, Pink Floyd. They said this, and it was amazing. Said, "Did you exchange a walk-in part in a war for a lead role in a cage?" And I thought, man, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about literally laying aside, going, man, I would rather take a walk-in part in the war than a lead role in a cage in a limited place, because that's really what an epic life is trading in the lead role in the story of us for a supporting role in the story of God. But man, I got to be honest with you. And I know this is the case for lots of you because I know you. Because the truth is that we don't always feel like our story is worth trading. We get it, like we're at church, so you're supposed to say, I like that, I agree, and yeah, I get it. But we don't feel worthy, right? There's a part of us that feels unworthy or damaged. Maybe something we did, something that was done to us, something we've experienced, something that was just the result of being in this world that leaves us feeling unworthy and damaged. And all I have to say to you is, me too. We were a Me Too place long before it was a hashtag, right? It wasn't just a thing for us. It's part of the identity. We are on this journey together. We all feel that way. I feel that way, unworthy and damaged. There are parts of my story and your story and all of our stories that have left us feeling crippled and useless and sidelined and misunderstood and disqualified and insignificant and insecure and condemned. But I got good news. I really do have good news, and I don't mean this in some religious, distant way. I really do have good news. The Bible tells us, and this is so important because if we grab a hold of this, it matters to us. Romans 8:1, Paul says this, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. That means that if you're here today and you know Christ as Savior, you're following Jesus, there is no condemnation for you. And if you're here today and that's not your story yet and you're considering it, let me just give you this advice. Man, consider it heavy, because there's no condemnation. All that feeling of being crippled and useless and misunderstood and sidelined and insignificant, in Jesus, all that goes away. It matters. It doesn't go away in an instant, because here's the problem. Why is it that I just said that I still feel that way? Because it doesn't go away in an instant. Right? Why is it that you feel crippled and condemned and useless and misunderstood? Why is it that we still feel that way if we're following Jesus? To get that answer, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. Now, it's church. So when I say beginning, you think Genesis chapter 1, right? All the way back to the beginning. That's the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But I got news for us. That's maybe news for you, maybe, and it's not news. I love the way John Eldredge says it, because he said, really, that's not Act 1, that's Act 3. There's a lot going on before in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. In fact, that's the third act. Before that, there was a war in heaven, and before that was before that. Like, it was even bigger. In fact, if we're going to get all the way back to the beginning, I'm going to go to John chapter 1, because it says this, and this is some really good stuff. I'm going to get my Bible because I forgot it over here. Just talk amongst yourselves for a minute, would you? All right. So John chapter 1, I just think this is important enough to look at this, and I just want you to see this, how important this is. In John chapter 1, he opens up and he says, in the beginning, the Word already existed. It's talking about Jesus. This is kind of the Christmas story. In the beginning, the Word, Jesus, already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing that was created, that includes you and me, nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. That's us. His life brought light to us. Now look at what verse 5 says, because this is where we're going to live, and this is huge. So important for us when it comes to our insignificance and our insecurity, all that condemnation, all that stuff. He says this, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. Now listen, I never distract us with a whole bunch of, I shouldn't say never because I'm about to do it, but like I never distract us with a whole lot of Greek, okay? Most of the time when pastors start talking about languages and Greek and all that stuff, most of the time it just makes them sound smart, and I'm not smart, even if this sounds smart, okay? But the Greek language is a little unique, okay? The Greek language, it's possible to use a word, in this case, the word that is in verse 5, this one word, it's possible to use one word and mean two things. Most of the time in the English language, we got to choose one or the other. But John likes to write this way. And this is one of those cases where John uses a word. The word is, and this is like Chicago Greek, okay? So like this, kata lambano, okay, this word, and it means nothing to you to really even say it, so I don't know why I even said it, but he says this, the darkness can never, kata lambano, the darkness can never extinguish it, because it means two things. We can have the word extinguish, like we have in this translation, and then other translations can say, the darkness can never understand it. Do you get what I'm saying? There's two ways to understand it, and it's not a choice of either or. What John means is both. The darkness can never overcome it, extinguish it, defeat it. The darkness can never even grasp it or understand it. Here's the thing, and this is a question that might produce a little bit of tension in the room. And if it makes you feel tense, I'm sorry. No, I'm really not. I don't care. Okay, so it's okay with me if you feel a little tense. You don't have to answer this out loud. But do you think that it's possible for a person to follow Jesus in one part of their life and remain in the darkness in another part of their life? Do you think it's possible for a person to give all in here and then still hold back part over here? Of course you do. Of course we think that. Because it's true. We see it all the times in our lives. And if you can't see it in your life, I promise the person who you're married to can see it. Right? They're like, oh yeah, he totally holds that back. I know it, right? She totally gets that, because it's easy for us to give Jesus everything over here, but just go, you know what, maybe later we'll get to this part of our life. We all do it. In fact, that's part of what brings in all that guilt and condemnation. Because the truth is that the enemy has a really simple job to accomplish in our lives. His very best work is done. Get this, I'm saying this, I want you to listen close. His very best work, the enemy's very best work is done when he can reduce faith to believing and behaving. Now listen, there's nothing wrong with believing and behaving. That's a very, very good start. But what the enemy does is often just reduce belief. Just going, hey, look, if you'll just believe these Little things, check the boxes, jump through the hoops, raise your hand at the right time, walk the aisle at the right time, do all the right stuff, believe these things, and then just mind your manners, right? Just behave. Don't do bad stuff. If we can just reduce faith to believe and behave, then his job is done. Because here's the deal. Half of this book, we call it the Old Testament. That's how we relate it to God. Just believe the right information and behave. Do the right things, jump through the right hoops, get all the right boxes checked. It never has to penetrate to your heart. It never has to be, and you can live in the light in some parts of your life and reserve the rest and just kind of live in the darkness. Now, here's the question that you and I have to ask is, where are you in the dark? Because we've already admitted, we already know that there are parts of our life where we're living in the light and some parts we've hidden over here in the dark. Where are you living in the dark? That's really the hardest question, isn't it? I mean, it's really those pieces of our life that we don't want to talk about. In fact, most of us have gone through labor in our life to get to a place where we don't even admit that those things exist. I don't like to talk about my pain. I mean, like, I'm the guy who hides behind humor. We've said this 100 times, right? I hide behind jokes. I hide behind relaxed. I hide behind even, like, here's the deal. If you're not going to make fun of me, I'll make fun of me so that if you're going to make fun of me, I'm already down here, right? It's easy. It's hard to kick a person who's already down and kicking himself, right? So it's difficult to do those things because we do a lot of stuff to put up defenses to protect us from dealing with our pain. But I want us to understand something. Not only is every part of your story crucial, every pain is crucial. It's the pain that leaves us crippled, isn't it? It's the pain that leaves us feeling insignificant and misunderstood. It's the pain that makes us feel disqualified, overlooked. It's the pain that helps us feel that condemnation that the enemy puts on top of us when he reduces life in faith to just believing and behaving. He wants us to never even deal with this pain, this hurt, this thing that's over here, this part of our life that we don't want to deal with. He wants us to put that aside. He wants us to minimize it. He wants us to make excuses for it. He wants us to compare it to other people's. He wants us to write passes and get around it and just ignore that it ever happened. But we can't manage it. We can't mitigate it. We can't just push it off to the side and pretend as it doesn't exist anymore. Because the reality is God literally came, put skin on, so that he could identify with our pain. And he says in Isaiah 61, he says it in Psalm 147, says it all throughout the New Testament over and over and over again, that he comes to bind up the brokenhearted and heal our wounds. That's huge to us. So if we feel all of that pain, we have to understand that every pain is crucial. And if you and I are going to take next steps out of our pain, I want to just give you a handful of things. These are outlined for you in that ourjourney.news. If you swipe over to message notes, you can see them. You don't need to write them down. But if you want to write them down or you're not going to look them up later, write them down for sure. Find something, some toilet paper, write it on your shoe. I don't care. Because this is important stuff. Number one, work through your pain. This is going to seem ridiculous, but think of and write down as many painful moments as you can remember, because every pain is crucial. Now, I know what you're saying. I don't know about all this stuff. It seems ridiculous, but I want you to, if you'll just trust me and do it, trust God and do it, because he wants to bind up our broken hearts, heal our wounds. If that's the case, doesn't it stand to reason we need to at least decide where the wounds are? I did this a little bit this week. I just spent a few minutes writing down some and that I'm willing to share with you. I felt like my family was the have-nots. That was exactly how it feels in my heart. My parents had marriage issues. They were regular issues all the time. Split up when I was 7. They got back together. My dad's anger explosions were significant. They'd always left me feeling like I'd caused it. My parents told me that they were getting a divorce when I was 7 years old. They used Twinkies to soften the blow. I don't like Twinkies still to today. I switched to a new school, and I felt entirely alone. My neighbor, who was always nice to me and always played with me and always did all those things, picked a fight with me so that he could fit in with other kids. I got beat up by a girl on a school bus. That's a fun story for another time. She called me a goober, and the name stuck. Okay, that doesn't seem like a big deal. Okay, forget it. My first serious thoughts about suicide were when I was about 12, right about the same time. I picked this guy Paul to like prove that I could beat up a guy because he was tall and skinny. I misunderstood how long muscles stretched out are good, and I got my ass kicked. Okay, and then the last thing, I was sexually abused by an adult man when I was 15. Now, I was 15 years old. Now listen, what can happen really easily is when you're writing these things down, you can make excuses for them, you can mitigate them, you can make them really small, you can make them insignificant, or you can make excuses for them. You can say, well, that isn't that big of a deal. I mean, seriously, somebody called you goober. Here's the second thing. Don't minimize or compare it. When you write them down, don't minimize or compare them. Just list them, right? Just write it down. You're not going into something big about it. Just write down every painful moment you can remember, and don't minimize it or compare it or make excuses for the people who did it. Just write it down. The third thing, don't try to understand why it was painful. Just admit that it was. It was painful. That doesn't make you a wimp. That doesn't make you a person who's touchy-feely. It doesn't make you less of a man. Just admit that it hurt. It's okay. When we hide behind our pain, saying, oh, that doesn't hurt, that's what makes us wimpy. Dealing with our pain is not a matter of being less manly. It's something that you and I can deal with, and when we do, we're healthier people for it. So don't try to understand it or explain it. Just admit that it was painful. Number 5, or number 4, whatever we're on. Ask yourself this is so important. What do you think is true about you because of that moment? Write it down. Just go back through the list. Pick up at the top and say, what do I think is true about me because of that moment in time? What do I think is true about me because my parents were from the wrong side of the tracks? Because my dad was a steel worker instead of the white collar guy. What do I think is true about me because of that moment? And then ask this other question, number 5. Are there other moments that say something similar to you about you? Man, I promise you this is crazy stuff. Guys, you don't have to tell your wives you're doing this, okay? Right? You just get a few minutes by yourself, go to McDonald's, sit down in a booth, and just write it down, right? You don't have to tell anybody. You don't have to work through your feelings. Just write down painful moments and walk through these 5 steps. Begin to do that. I promise you, when you start realizing that the enemy has been attacking you, he's been minimizing faith to believe and behave. Just do the right things, believe the right information, put that stuff in a box over here, and never deal with any of this stuff. And when he did that, he's partitioned off gigantic parts of your life, and he's been lying to you about them. Many of the pains you've experienced and lots of the messages that you've gotten from them are very similar. And then there's a common thread. And if you ever had the nerve, the guts, if you were big enough, right, to talk to another guy and tell him what you've been experiencing, I promise you this, you're going to hear the same thing. If you walked up to me and said, hey, this is what I heard about me, to me, from the enemy, I promise you those same things are my story. He's not creative. He's consistent. He doesn't do new things. He only has one trick, and he plays it over and over and over again. And Jesus came to be light in that darkness, not just to make us feel good on Sundays, not just so that we can smile and put on the fakeness and all that kind of stuff. He came to heal our brokenness, bind up our hearts, and set us free. He came so that captives no longer have to be held back. And he doesn't want you to live a big, influential, amazing, epic life. He wants you to understand that every pain in your life is crucial. Look at verse 10 through 12 in that same chapter. It just jumps down. The next verses are important, but I want to skip over it, and you can read them later. In verse 10, it says this, same chapter. Jesus came into the world, but the world didn't recognize him. He came to his own people, and even they rejected him, but to all who believed in him and accepted him, he gave the right to become the children of God. Man, do you always feel like a child of God? I don't. Often I feel like God's mildly disappointed in me. That's how I've felt since I was a little kid, that God was okay with me because he's okay with everybody. He loves everybody. He loves me just like everybody else. I felt like preschool graduation, right? You're so special, just like everyone else, like just like all the other little kids who got to put on all this stuff. And I always felt like that, but I always felt like God was just mildly disappointed in me. Doesn't it feel like God at some points in our life is just waiting to be angry at us? Man, I don't feel often like what John says I could feel like. You know why that is? Because I've reduced faith to believe and behave and never invite Jesus into this pain because I'm not worthy of being a child of God. The things that I've experienced, the pain that I carry makes me feel like I'm dirty and used and worthless. But that's not what he says. There's no condemnation for those who are in Jesus. That he came to shine light into the darkness. That he came to give me the right, not the privilege, not the allowance, the right to be called a child of God. Look at what it says just a little bit in verse 14. Man, this is good stuff. So the Word became a human. Remember, it says, in the beginning was the Word was with God. Word was God. So God, the Word, Jesus, became flesh. And I love this, and made his home among us. The Message is a paraphrase, and it's like a sermon, and it is really good. He says that the Word became flesh, and I love this phrase, and moved into the neighborhood. Like lived where we lived, how we live, understand what we've gone through. This is the thing where he feels used. He's felt limited. He's felt insecure. He's felt all of those things just like we felt. But the darkness can't overcome it because the darkness can't even understand it. There's parts of our life where we've lived in the darkness. We've given parts of our life to Jesus and followed. Man, we want it, but we haven't invited him often into all of our pain. That's where our life is stuck. You ever felt like your faith was stuck? Maybe even for the last 6-8 weeks, you've been going, man, my faith's stuck. Maybe I need to change churches again. How did it work out last time? Right? How did it work out when you went from that church to over to here to over there? And you feel like changing churches again is going to renew your faith? I promise it won't. Because there's nothing that we can do in an hour that's going to renew your faith. What's going to happen is when you invite Jesus into the dark parts of our life where we haven't ever experienced him, that's where our faith moves forward. Because here's the deal. Jesus came to change what a relationship with God looks like. See, prior to Jesus, it's what we've been singing all morning. It's what Bryce read in Revelation 21. He read that there comes this day when Jesus goes like, I moved in, I'm God with us. That's what we call Jesus, Emmanuel. The word means that God is with us. The whole deal is that faith is more than just believing and behaving. That's what they had most of the Old Testament. Believe the right information, do the right rituals, attend the right feasts, do the right stuff, go to this thing, go to that thing, make the right sacrifices, believe and behave. And when we reduce faith to that believe and behave thing, we get the short-circuited, lame, worthless faith that we've had all of our lives. There's so much more. There's so much more. When we invite Jesus into our pain, we can recognize that he came to make a relationship with God tangible and real. He became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. Here's what I mean by that. Jesus came to give you and me life. Maybe when we talked about it earlier and I said that you existed part of your life in the darkness, maybe you were like, yeah, I've kind of held this whole faith thing at arm's length. I'm not sure about Jesus. I'm not sure about church. I'm not sure about Christians. I'm not sure about all that stuff. And I want you to know that you are in a safe place. And maybe the part of your darkness, that's part of your life that's still in darkness, is that part of you that just won't yield to any of the believing, right? I want you to understand something. The very best thing you can do to take a next step today is just begin by believing. It's not everything. It's the first step. So in a moment, we're going to wrap this service up with a thing we call communion. In a little bit, the ushers are going to pass by a plate. And it's going to have a little pile of bread and a little cup of juice in it. And when it gets to you, if you're kind of been holding faith at arm's length and you want to keep holding it there, that's on you. You can do that if you want. That's okay with us. But maybe today is a day when you go, you know what? I'm tired of feeling misunderstood and condemned and worthless and used and damaged. I'm tired of those things. I want to be called a child of God. Well, maybe the best way you can express your belief today is just to begin by taking communion with us. Maybe you tell Jesus about it and just tell him that I believe that that's what you did for me. And then would you do this one really important thing? So important. Tell somebody. Tell the person that brought you, the person you came with, tell me, write it on your card. I would love it if you just flip that card over and write, I want to begin a relationship with Jesus. We just want to help you take those first few believe steps. Believe is so important. It's just not all there is. But if you're here today and that's your story, you're already a follower of Jesus. When you just take those pieces, I want you to hold them for a minute because we're not going to take communion separately today. We're going to take it together. Because this is what communion is about. It's about community. It's about us taking this together as a family. While the ushers are handing those out, you guys can come up. I want to tell you about number 6. It's the last thing. It's never stop digging. And some of you are going, oh yeah, I dealt with some of those things. I kind of hit the high spots. I went to a retreat. I read a book or whatever. And I kind of knocked off the edges. I promise you, no matter how many times you write down those things and you don't make excuses for it and you don't mitigate it or compare it to other people, the more you do those things, the more stuff you're going to uncover. And the more pain you uncover, the more redemption you're going to invite into your life. And I want you to know something. No matter what you've been through, there's healing for it if you'll invite Jesus into it. It's that simple. It's such a powerful idea, really, to consider that God continues to heal our brokenness. Just hold on to those communion elements because in a moment we're going to take them together and we're going to recognize the power and the significance of God. Because here's the most beautiful piece of it. Jesus, the Word, became flesh so that he could change what a relationship with Jesus looks like. I'm going to give you just a minute. While the ushers are finishing that, and you're just taking them and holding them, I'm just going to give you a second to consider the weight of that in silence. So, this little piece of bread, which I dropped, and this little cup of juice, they're symbols for us. There's nothing special about them. They're symbols for us of the Word that became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. He was with his disciples, and he wanted to give them something to remember it by. And he was with his disciples at the last meal together, and they're hanging out around the table. And he took the bread, and he breaks it, and he gives thanks for it, and he reminds them of this thing. This is my body, which is broken for you. And listen, every time you do it, remember that I became flesh to change what a relationship with God looks like. Remember me that way. And then he said when the meal was over, right, they'd finished eating and kind of put all that stuff aside and they break out the wine. And he takes the cup and he pours it and he says to them this like thing that turns this whole feast on their head. Because They'd heard all this before. They'd had the feast. They'd had all the things together. And he took this little cup of wine and he says to us, thanks to God for it. And then he reminds them that this is so much more than a cup. Well, it's not much more than a cup. It doesn't become anything. It's not anything special. It just represents for us the blood of Jesus poured out to cover our sin. But not just that, to heal our broken hearts and set our captivity free. That's what he wants us to remember every time we do this. Let's pray together. Jesus, we're thankful for your goodness, for your love for us, for the profound healing that we can find in you. Lord, I just pray that you give us the confidence, the boldness to step forward, to be strong, and to deal with the things that are in our past, the parts of our story that hurt, the things that we've kept in the dark. Jesus, we invite you into that, and we want to walk with you in your healing of our brokenness. It's in your name we pray. Amen. And now, may the God who became flesh and moved into the neighborhood so that you and I don't have to feel worthless and misunderstood and sidelined and insignificant and insecure and condemned, take you out of here to live the life of freedom he intended for you. We'll see you next week for part 3 of the Epic series. Don't forget to sign up for groups.